Well, it's been 2 weeks since Rob Hersov and I last had our weekly chat. We may be fortnightly chat now. In between, I've been to Davos. He's had a fantastic interview with Siziphiwe Ntlaningeshe, SWM. I mean, it was a great interview, Rob, and has been very well watched as well. It is, however, today a day when we're going to be talking a lot about the government of national unity for very good reason. On a knife edge or not, we'll hear from Mr. Hersov. Before we kick off, that interview with Sizwe was really quite splendid. I've got a high regard for him. He was on BizNews TV before, and I really think that this guy is smart. He's measured. He's balanced. He's, I think, like all of us, had his moments that perhaps have turned people against him or given them views. But you had a really good interaction and engagement with him. And I see more than 200,000 people have watched that very extended interview, Rob. What did you get out of that?
Well, I think it's closer to 300,000 now, but,
Wow.
Vusi Timbakwaya basically said, Sizwe needs more wealth creators, investors, entrepreneurs, business people of all shapes and sizes on his show because, it's his show is very much lawyers, politicians, opinion formers, regulators, and not wealth creators. Would you be on his show? And I've always had a kind of negative, 4 or 5 negatives against Sizwe. One by one, they've fallen though. So, you know, I've listened to a lot of his shows. I'm a subscriber. I follow him. And firstly, his name, Mpofu.
Mm.
There's Dali Mpofu, his father. I mean, it doesn't get worse than that. But he interviewed his mother, who's a white lady, Laura Oxley Smith, I think, and a fabulous interview with her where she really was the person that brought him up. And Dali was much more the sort of absent father. And even though Sizwe says he has a sort of soft spot for the EFF, you can kind of understand it because of his dad. But he is not an EFF man by any means. So that fell away. Secondly, his show received funding from the George Soros Open Society, which is the Satan for anyone who's sensible and anti-woke. But he explained that quite coherently in one of his interviews where he said he just applied for a grant to many different organizations, and he got the grant from the George Soros Open Society in 2019, received the money, 500,000 Rand, which was substantial to help him build his business, and they never asked for anything more, no narrative. So that fell away. And then when I was with him, he said, yes, he was part of the group that started the Roads Must Fall momentum, but he felt it went way too far. It was a race to the bottom. And he feels a bit guilty about where it went in the end. So those things that I was sort of holding against him all fell away. And then when I met him and did the interview with him, I really came to like him enormously. And I do think he's a very measured, sensible, open-minded fella. And he wants more wealth creators, business people on his show. So maybe some of the tribesmen can put their hands up and say that they'd be prepared to be on his show. He doesn't do gotcha moments. He doesn't try and come at you. So I enjoyed it, and I appreciated what we were able to talk about together.
It's so interesting that because you have also got that reputation. There are people, hardly, I won't say a day, but certainly in a week, there'd be a number of people who say, what are you bothering with Rob Hersov about? What can he add? What value can he add?
What are
He has
you
never
bothering with?
created anything, etc., etc. So
Mm.
my standard response is, hang on, this guy has a Harvard MBA. This guy was PA to Rupert Murdoch, who most of us would love to even just say hello to, and Johan Rupert, ditto in a South African sense. He's created businesses. He's sold a business to Warren Buffett's NetJets. You know, what more, he knows a lot more about business than 99.9% of the people who are on this show. But more than that, Rob, what I really appreciate is that you do have incredible connections and you share those insights with us. You don't hedge your bets like, again, 99.9% of people who I engage with in that area are much more inclined to conspiracies of silence. And so the rest of society sits by and guesses. You help us to fill quite a lot of the jigsaw puzzle. by giving us your insights. And so that I appreciate. And so does the tribe. We see every time you and I have a conversation, we see that what you share is very, very much appreciated, because those who are in the elites don't kind of realize how outside many people are in society. And unless you can bring those together, like with your interview with Sizwe, I'm sure there are hundreds of thousands, literally, of people who've seen another side to you now as a result of that and as a result of him. So good, big shout out to
Thank
him.
you.
But let's just start with the government of national unity and where we are right now. And somebody yesterday, I interviewed David Ansari yesterday from the Free Market Foundation. He said, but hang on, how much more must the DA take? They were abused in Chwani. They really, the ANC knifed them in the back there. They've been abused with the Bella Bill. They've been abused now with this expropriation without compensation in the middle of Davos, where we're hearing in Davos that there's a massive move towards private property, and Cyril goes and signs the bill. Just wait a week, for heaven's sake. And he didn't bother to let poor old Steenhuisen, who was there on a panel with people, there were no conversations or questions about it. But I went along early in the morning to go and watch this. And I could just imagine how he must have reacted when he got the news on social media a little later on. It's your partner, for heaven's sake. And you could be in a position where your partner says, okay, let's have a vote of no confidence in Cyril. And what happens then? Cyril loses his job and his big, chairman of the world kind of thing, as he seems to think it is, as head of the G20 this year. He's in a very precarious position, but they appear to be just dawning on and running the country as though they were still with more than 50% of the vote. Now, this might be coming from a very uninformed position, but it's what I saw with my own eyes. What is the informed position of Rob Hersov and the people that you're engaging with?
So the informed position is the DA just need to keep on fighting. I'll give you Gayton's view on this thing, which is very interesting. In the Bella Bill, there was consultation. Cyril did, or the ANC did, along the way, back and forward with the members of the GNU, which is how things should happen. And it ends up where it ends up, whether we agree or not. It didn't happen with this EWC bill. Cyril just signed it unilaterally, and he undermined his partners in the GNU, and that is unacceptable. And he's going to take a verbal pounding on Wednesday at the budget meeting from the DA, who have already called for this to be motioned, and from the Patriotic Alliance and all the non-ANC partners. His behavior is unacceptable. But the DA, Patriotic Alliance, and others must not pull out of the GNU. David Ansar is wrong. And much as though I agree with David and back him and hold him on a pedestal, this is not the moment to pull out of the GNU, because if you don't like expropriation without compensation, the bill, forget about the wording. It really is expropriation with some negotiation is what it really is. Just the name is horrific. I mean, how to prevent foreign direct investment in this country is have a name of a bill called expropriation without compensation. Moronic. Change the name. But nonetheless, why even sign it? And why not consult your partners? But Cyril's going to take a pounding. But if you want Jacob Zuma to walk through the door and be the partner of the ANC, you will have expropriation immediately. So do not, DA and PA, do not draw a line in the sand on this one. Keep fighting, keep pushing back, keep putting Cyril, who's completely isolated, under pressure. Fight, but stay within the GNU. It would be the worst thing of all to pull out of the GNU. And Helen Zille agrees with me, and Gayton McKenzie agree with me. I've spoken to both of them. So the GNU must hold, and it must hold for the next 2-3 years, even if it goes sideways, even if it tacks back and forward, even if it doesn't deliver economic growth. And Gayton said a very amusing thing to me yesterday. He said, you caught us all napping, everyone in the GNU, because you said in your recent Sizwe podcast and the recent BizNews one, nobody in the GNUs even mentioned the words economic growth. And he said, we all realize that's absolutely true. None of us are talking about it. And he said to me the 3 reasons for the GNU in this order, in this priority. 1, keep MK out. 2, deliver economic growth because that lifts all boats. And 3, crime, solve the issue of crime, make people feel safe. So those are the priorities in that order. So the immediate priority is keep Jacob Zuma and MK out of the government, which means you've got to stay with the GNU.
Hmm. Okay, well, there are all kinds of perspectives on this, but I've got to ask you the Frans Cronje view of the bayonet, that as the bayonet gets pushed in, and that's ANC approach, if not Cyril's, certainly the party and the National Democratic Revolution kind of approach, as you push the bayonet in and until you hit steel, you keep pushing. Now, how much further must the bayonet be pushed in? What's next before there is some steel from the partners in the GNU?
So the steel's happening. They're coming together. Remember, the GNU is 6, 7 months old. And we all look at Bella moving forward, NHI moving forward, this preposterous, racist 100 billion rand fund to invest in, basically non-white, non-Indian, non-colored businesses is really what it's about. It's a racist bill of Parks Tar, who there are glimmers of hope in that man, but pushing that forward is not what should be happening. Good for Dean McPherson to stand against it and the expropriation bill. But what is happening is this is forging together what I think in 2029 will be the formation of a new political party in South Africa. It will be the first center-right, true center-right, pro-property rights, pro-free speech, libertarian, capitalist political party in South Africa, which doesn't really exist. I mean, if you take who are the most conservative pro-property rights, pro-free speech organizations, it would be Patriotic Alliance, FF Plus, Freedom Front Plus, and Inkatha, with DA being sort of a wimpy version of the Democrats, as an American kind of example. If those can get together for 2029, which I think will happen, we will have a proper centrist party that we really need. And obviously, who my vote would be to run this is our future potential benevolent dictator, Gayton McKenzie.
Talking
So
about
this is what's happening.
Mm.
Steel's coming, and it's forging this. This will take a while to take place, but it's going to happen.
Talking about benevolent dictators or wannabe benevolent dictators, the online conversation between the Colombians and Donald Trump this past week was quite instructive. And Donald Trump is surrounded by a lot of South Africans who would be looking back to the old country with, I'm sure, growing horror when they see things like the expropriation without compensation bill and other things that are just so far away from where the world is moving. What about that side? What about if Trump decides, Trump's aided and abetted by Elon Musk and others, decides I've got to make some kind of statement to South Africa, like I've just done with Colombia, and Colombia backed down very quickly. The president did there. What form might that take? Yeah,
Alec, it's coming, and we will thank two people in particular. We will thank Gary Player and Rian Barnard. You may not have heard of the second, but he is an extraordinary South African businessman who has the ear and the trust of both Donald Trump and Elon Musk. As a result of Gary Player's extraordinary and 30-year-old friendship with Donald Trump and his beloved patriotism of our country, South Africa. If there's a South African that Donald Trump trusts the most, it's Gary Player, followed by Rian Barnard. We're going to have a Colombia moment pretty soon. Now, I know that Donald Trump and Cyril Ramaphosa had a phone call before Davos. Donald Trump didn't even greet him, didn't pay him any respect. And basically, the message was to Cyril Ramaphosa, your time is coming, pal, you and the ANC. America will wait until an ambassador is in place and the Undersecretary of State for Africa has been appointed. And watch those appointments, because the focus of those two people on behalf of Donald Trump and his organization, his MAGA, his cabinet, his government, are going to turn their spotlight onto the ANC and onto South Africa. And there are words, big trouble ahead for Cyril and his merry men in the next few months. It's going to happen. What exactly that means, we're yet to find out. But Cyril is running scared. And I know that because we've heard it from Gwede, Fikile, and all the people around him. Cyril basically came off that phone call with Donald Trump scared as hell. And that's a good thing.
Well, you didn't show it in Davos. You didn't pitch for the heads of state meeting. Didn't pitch, Rob. Here you have presidents and prime ministers of all the countries who were in Davos, and I think there were over 24 of them. And there was an empty chair where Mr. Ramaphosa would have been. I think that night he went off to this brand South Africa jamboree, which was primarily South Africans who attended it. It was really quite strange. So he doesn't, and he does. He is giving himself quite a elevated status as the head of the G20 meetings, which are going to be brought to South Africa. Now, how important a constituency does he have there as being the guy who runs the G20? Is this something that might maybe give Donald Trump pause?
None at all. Donald Trump doesn't have pause. He's a man of principles, beliefs. He made his election promises. He stuck to them. I mean, look at his extraordinary executive orders within 100 hours of being made president. And everybody's backing down. Once he focuses attention, like he did with Colombia, they talk a big game and boom, they back down. And that spotlight's coming on Cyril and it's coming on the ANC and it's coming on South Africa. Big time. And I reckon in the next 2 to 3 months, you're going to see the ANC backpedaling and running scared, because they have pushed the knife and pushed the knife and pushed the knife into the Democrats, who just pathetically, Obama, pathetic, Biden, pathetic. Back off, back off, back off. Trump, the knife hits steel immediately and he's going to come in swinging.
So, what could that mean? Does it mean a very tough year for South Africa, for the economy, for people who, unlike you, believe that this is an investable country still?
I don't know who thinks it's investable. I'd like to meet them. Look, I don't think America is going to cancel AGOA or the fisheries agreement, because I think the tariff punishment is going to chase us further into the arms of China. And China, I believe, are our biggest trading partner now. And America's not going to do that. But I think, and I'm just guessing now, they're going to target individual members of the ANC. Love to see some of those guys on the red list. I'd love to see some of those guys' bank accounts frozen, inability to travel, and individual sanctions on ANC members. Anyone who's been involved with taking money from Iran, Naledi Pandor, Cyril himself, people like that are going to come under the cosh, and deservedly so. But, I think America's not going to want to chase South Africa further into China's hands, but there will be punishments ahead.
That's a very interesting line of inquiry, where we understand that the ANC was funded by Iran. That was how it was able to fight the election, coming from a bankrupted situation to one that had plenty of money. Are you then telling us that your speculation would be, given that the American unhappiness with Iran, that they would be targeting ANC members as a consequence of that?
Look, have a little think about MTN winning licenses in Iran in, I'm going to get this wrong, 2004, 2005, when MTN went in there. There's no question money changed hands. Money went from the ANC through MTN, from MTN to the Iranian government to win that license. whether it was a license payment or bribes, one day it'll all come out. And then MTN moved into Syria. MTN has coverage in Syria, which means that they have been able to monitor conversations, aiding and abetting Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and Iran. Complicit 100%. So America knows this. America's got all the ammo, all the information. There's going to be a real comeback via the ANC and MTN, I reckon. Where was NASFIRST in all this? Didn't NASFIRST create MTN? Wouldn't Koos Becker know this stuff? All this is going to come out.
Well, to his credit, Koos Becker did leave Russia at a huge cost immediately after Russia invaded Ukraine. And MTN's relationship with with NASPAS goes back way before the whole Iranian story. But of course, Cyril Ramaphosa's doesn't. He was chairman of MTN, and the al-Bashir relationship in Syria was very, very deep. They did pull out, I think, 2 years ago. So MTN did, at a big loss, but I guess all of this will come out in the wash because there is a court case going on between Turkcell and MTN at the moment on this very subject. So are we to then understand that and that court case, by the way, is happening in the United States, that if the evidence is believed by the US administration, the Trump administration, that there will be retribution? Is this the kind of administration that they are running there?
Hopefully, yes. And by the way, they should kick Ebrahim Rasool back into touch. How can he be the South African ambassador to the US? An anti-Semite, a racist, a terrible human being who is going to lower the megaphone a bit on Israel Hamas. I mean, he should be kicked to touch, hurled back to South Africa, and rejected by the US as the ambassador, in my view.
Rob, you engage with a lot of people that most South Africans don't have access to. And I was watching in Davos this year the whole approach of the South African delegation, which was incredibly out of touch with what was going on in the plenary hall. And we can talk in a moment about Javier Milei, who has done miraculous things in Argentina in a year. And even that WEF, who didn't really like him last year, were gushing in bringing him through today. But how is it possible for a country to be so out of step? We laugh and we joke often about South Africa. Well, the world's going one way, we go a different way. Eventually, we do get to the end result. We just take a more winding road. At what cost we won't investigate. But how is that possible that you get people who are as well connected as one would assume that the South African government are, and yet they don't get it? They don't see, can't read the messages on the wind. They're still sticking with a story that might have gone down 2-3 years ago, but is so far out of touch today that it's embarrassing.
They're ideologues. These are people who were undereducated during apartheid because of the disastrous education system there, went and were propagandized by the Soviet Union. These are not very smart people, Cyril and his accolades. And if you look at who are the business people, the people that understand finance and business in the ANC cabinet, it's Enoch Godongwana, one. And I wouldn't even say Cyril is particularly business savvy. He's business aware at best. He sat in meetings where people talk about profitability, loss, investing, but he's not, I wouldn't say he's not a sophisticated. At best, he's a trade unionist. At best. He's not really a businessman. He's business aware. And that's the best there is in the cabinet other than Enoch. So these are people that are just pretty clueless. They're Madala for a start. I mean, the fact we have a Communist Party member in the cabinet, Gwede Mantashe, is beyond moronic. Have a look at Fikile Mbalula's WhatsApp picture. Mao Zedong, the killer of 50, 60 million people, is his WhatsApp picture. I mean, is he a teenager? I mean, it's incomprehensible that we have these stupid, undereducated, Soviet-trained, disconnected people in the cabinet from the ANC. I mean, how hard it must be for the other members of the GNU to be dealing with these people on a daily basis. They probably don't even do their homework. And here's the other sad thing about South Africa. We have a democracy. A minority of people vote. The vast majority of South Africans do not understand what democracy is or constitution is. And you know what they vote on? They vote on getting a T-shirt, wearing the T-shirt, being fed chicken on the day, and a poster of their hero that they follow. And come 2029, these are the posters that will be up there. Jacob Zuma, even if he is dead by then, he'll rule from the grave with MK. He'll be the spiritual leader. His poster will be there. Probably still Julius Malema, but he'll cease to be relevant. John Steenhuisen's successor, whoever that is, Jordan Hill-Lewis or whomever, and Gayton McKenzie. Those will be the people that people vote for. And on the day, it'll be back to 2024, which will be logistics win the day. Who has the buses to get people to the voting booth? Who can get people wearing their T-shirts? And who can get all the posters up and feed people chicken? I mean, the fact we're a democracy is almost inconceivable. We do, to fix this country, I'm going to say a benevolent dictator. We do need one. But we really need a decisive leader. Trump, democratically elected, but he is decisive. There's no messing around with him. Javier Milei, democratically elected, decisive as hell. I wish we could have someone at the top, decisive as hell, obviously in the direction we prefer. But maybe we do need a benevolent dictator to fix this country.
Unless, let me share something with you very briefly. Some years ago, I happened to luck out in Davos and stayed in the same hotel as Muhammad Yunus, the founder of Grameen Bank, World Nobel Peace Prize winner, and a really extraordinary human being. I went along to a relatively small talk that Muhammad Yunus had. Klaus Schwab from the WEF interviewed him. And interestingly enough, Muhammad Yunus and Schwab together created what is the word social entrepreneurship and the Schwab Foundation, which has done a lot of good. But Muhammad Yunus told us this story. He said, the world should be sending their university professors and researchers to Bangladesh because Bangladesh had a not benevolent dictator. They had a dictatorship for 16 years. He said, yes, there were elections every 5 years, but no one was allowed to vote. How's that? He says it has been in a downward spiral for the last 16 years as a consequence of this. And the young people, his view is that the youth of today are the most powerful generation on earth that we've ever seen. He says they're not young Bangladeshis, they are young global people. He says they're all connected on their cell phone. And so what they did was they said no more, the young people. And they would leave their homes in the morning, say goodbye to their mothers and fathers and their friends and say, well, hopefully we'll see you tonight. They went off and protested. And they had a pact amongst themselves. This is what Muhammad Yunus tells us, that as the police and the army shot them, and they shot hundreds of them, they did not run away. So when you have a guy standing next to you and a soldier shoots them and kills them, they fall there and you stand. He said there were hundreds that were shot in this way over 3 days. Every morning saying goodbye to their parents, I might not see you tonight, saying goodbye to their friends, and off they went. After the third day, the parents said, this is no good. I don't want to say goodbye to my child. And they joined in. And they all marched to the Prime Minister's residence, and the Prime Minister fled. And Muhammad Yunus, being the most famous Bangladeshi, was asked by these young people to come home and to show them how to form a new government. And he said he's the chief, he's not the prime minister elect or anything like that. He's the chief consultant to the creation of a new constitution, of a new world, of a new approach. And I thought, when I was listening to this, I thought, surely South African young people no chance of getting a job, very little chance of actually making any kind of a future here, will be looking at the Bangladesh of the world and saying, hang on, we don't have to accept this system where people get voted into office because of chicken and T-shirts. We are far smarter than our parents were or their parents before them, and indeed, probably a heck of a lot smarter than those who are ruling us and applying these ideological ideas on us. Isn't it time for us to start having this WhatsApp group amongst ourselves, talking to a leader like Sizwe Mpofu Walsh, hearing what he has to say, and actually changing the world? Because the world is going in a very, well, forget the world. South Africa is going in a very, very difficult and strange direction at the moment, where, as you said earlier, we know that the ruling party or the guys who are ruling it should be ejected, but it's too ghastly to contemplate what the alternative is. For young people, they've got to be looking at this, and they haven't been voting, and just shaking their heads and saying, well, how do we change this? So the Bangladeshi story was probably the biggest thing that I brought back from Davos, because it's from such a credible voice, and from it is such a mind blowing change that was created by courageous young people who stood while hundreds of their numbers were being slaughtered right next to them. Incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, but Alec, that's young people thinking independently. There's a cultural bias against that in South Africa. People look to the tribal leader, the strong man, the wiser, older leader. It's this tribal nonsense that holds people back and holds people down. And if you look, and if I could just jump slightly to the Cyril's, who's going to follow Cyril? For 30 years, the ANC, still pretending it's a liberation organization and never actually growing up and becoming a government, has gone from president to deputy president. The deputy president stepped up, and they've never skipped a generation. And the next generation is Paul Mashatile, but he ain't going to get it. He's going to get skipped. And the person doing the greatest running right now is Fikile Mbalula. If there was going to be an appointment today to replace Cyril, it would probably be Fikile Mbalula. But who Cyril has in mind, and I found the name, is the Minister of Justice. That's the one he's bestowing his interest and his love on. Mamaloko Kubai, with all her negative previous, corruption charges. She's the Minister of Justice. She's the favored one that Cyril would like to anoint as the next president of the ANC and of this country. And that is not skipping one, but it's skipping two generations. So I think big changes are coming. And that's where we are today.
Okay, so you don't think that South African youth are going to step up and want to make a difference? That they're just going to carry on in the same route, not voting, not caring, not really giving a damn, and just allowing the rot to continue? It is something that many in Bangladesh, because remember, the Bangladeshi society is the vast majority of Muslims. So if you want to talk about hierarchical and on believing in the wisdom of the elders, well, that certainly
But
is a
it's a more
society that comes from
homogenous,
there.
Alex, a much more homogenous society, Bangladesh, than South Africa. The difference between Mpumalanga, KZN, the Northern Cape, I mean, it could be completely different worlds. They speak
Mm.
different languages, they have different gods, different leaders, different approaches to life, different cultures. South Africa has 26 different weird tribes. I'm generalizing. Different languages, different cultures, different regions. There's no coherent pan-South African group or organization. Each region is independent. And I just don't see the youth being this kind of pan-South Africa organization that can come up with a leader and come up with, its own approach. Probably the most populist youth leader has been Julius Malema, and his power's fading rapidly.
Rob, let's move on to Javier Milei and his extraordinary speech at Davos. Again, more than 100,000 people have now watched it on BizNews. We republished it. What was your take on it?
He's a hero of mine. He and Bukele are the two most exciting rock star politicians in the world. And I admire both of them for slightly different reasons. But Javier Milei is the experiment, the live experiment I've always wanted to see as a libertarian. And he's putting action into place that is going to prove to all the people that think socialism hasn't been tried properly, or, we need to go down this leftist socialist route. I'm going to prove to them it doesn't work. Socialism does not work and never will. And the only way forward is free markets, free enterprise, free speech, libertad, as Javier Milei finishes his speeches. What a rock star. If there's someone I really want to meet in the next year or so, Javier Milei, Bukele, and Trump, actually. Those are my three.
And he was saying how when he came back just a year ago, there was a very different approach, and how things are now changing. And he's got quite a few people who are thinking the same way that he's thinking.
So
How rapidly is that changing?
in 1 year, he's taken inflation from whatever it is, thousands of percent down to 2% a month and dropping lower. And people, when you're buying goods with the money in your pocket, you see the difference. In 1 year, he's been able to prove that. The next. His next hacksaw, he hasn't cut social grants. He's actually increased them by removing the middleman. And the same can be done in South Africa. In 12 months, a proper leader, a libertarian center-right leader, someone like Gayton, someone like Helen Zille, someone like you and me, could make changes so rapidly and move economic growth from under 1% to 2-3% in this country in 1 year. And Javier Milei's experiment we need to follow. I mean, it's interesting because I was back and forwarding on WhatsApp with Enoch Gonogwana, who I do like and do respect. And he's also watching carefully what's happening in Argentina. Now, whether he'd be brave enough to go to the rest of the ANC and say, guys, we've got it wrong. We should be trying these developments, these cuts, these movements to get economic growth is to be seen. But Enoch, come on, you've got the intellect, have the spine, and let's implement some of the changes Javier Milei is doing in Argentina, in South Africa, now, please.
The crazy thing about this is that there's no rocket science to it. You can see that the pendulum has swung much too far towards the bureaucrats and the socialists, and it needs to swing the other way. All it takes is backbone to make those changes. And perhaps, as Milei says, we had 100 years of this. And so we got to a rock bottom, which is way beyond where you in other parts of the world are at. But you're heading there. He calls the West, we at Argentina are your ghost of Christmas future. And South Africa would be very much in that mold. So it's not like intellectually you can't grab this. What is stopping them from doing it? Is it just too much benefit from the status quo?
It's that and power. The ANC is fragmenting. The ANC is dying, not fast enough in my view. But the next step is to ditch the communists, because that's just ideological stupidity, and crack the unions. So we need to find a way to break the unions. What is holding back education in this country? The teachers' unions, protecting terrible teachers and not allowing any fluidity and any expansion and any dynamism in the education sector. And if there's one thing that's going to hold South Africa back forever, it's the education. We put more than enough money in and get horrific results out the other end. It's the unions that's the problem. So how we crack the unions is the next big step. And then to add one more thing while we're at it, minimum wage. Minimum wage is moronic. If we had no minimum wage, we would reduce unemployment by 50% of what it is already, because there'd be a negotiated agreement between employer and employee. Are you prepared to work for this amount? Yes, no? Right, I can hire 10 more people at this amount. And 10 more people employed, multiplier effect times 10, to 100 people getting an income.
The other thing, I guess, is that, as Christo Visa puts it, there are truths and then there are uber truths. And the uber truth of South Africa is that we've got all of these laws that have been designed for the world as we want it, but not as it is. The incentive for a person from outside of South Africa to come into South Africa is far, far greater than the incentive for a Mexican to go into the United States, if you take GDP per capita as a benchmark. And a consequence of that, there's 1 billion people in a continent, many of whom will come from far, far, far away, perhaps on the narrative, perhaps because they can come to South Africa and they can earn a better living and they can improve their lives. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but this is not the basis of what I'd like you to consider here. But if you have national health insurance, how are you going to stop people who were perhaps born in Somalia from participating in that? And if that's the case, how do you afford it? If you have minimum wage, how are you going to stop people from breaking the law and employing people who at below the minimum wage because they come from Mozambique? And in Mozambique, they get no chance. In fact, to them, what they earn in South Africa is a princely amount. How are you going to enforce these idealistic laws where you have got a United States that can't stop the Mexicans coming in there? How do you think you can stop people from other parts of Africa coming through? And that's really something that I'd love you to ponder, because quite often when we talk about these various laws that are in South Africa, we assume that they are laws that are being followed by people. All too often, I come across people who say, well, either if you want an invoice, pay me an extra 15%, please. Otherwise, we don't do. The government needn't know, and that is not just. That's the reality of the world that we live in, Rob. And how does one address that?
Well, you can't have illegal foreigners in your country. You've got to get rid of them. Simple as that. You've got to get rid of illegal foreigners in your country. Mass export. Boot them out. Nobody likes saying it, but it's a must and it's true and it has to happen. I mean, there are so many. I had a meeting with an MK MP. He's actually a decent, intelligent guy, ideologically on another planet to me. And I said to him, can't you bring some rational thought into MK and have them at least promote them? And I'll give one example, okay? His nickname's Jimmy Manyi. I'll give you one example. The aviation sector. The ANC has bankrupted SAA, but FlySafair and Airlink have stepped into the breach and everybody's flying. And it's pretty obvious we don't need South African Airways anymore. So why don't we shutter it, close it down, and just let private enterprise carry on? And you, as part of the MK, should just say, this is the reality of the situation. Let's accept reality here and there. Doesn't mean you have to be pro-privatization, like I am, but you should accept the reality. This is the reality of the aviation sector. Let's not spend any more money on South African Airways. Move on. Okay? And he sort of thought about it. But, they're too scared to step against each other and their ideologies. They're too scared to think openly, even though he, Jimmy Manyi, stood up at the Bitcoin conference and promoted South Africa having a strategic Bitcoin reserve. I mean, what a forward-thinking human being. So, I think for 3 years we're going to go nowhere. But we're not going to have that young people standing up and hitting the streets. We're not going to have that either. We're just going to go nowhere for 3 years. And what I'm waiting for is the stick, America bringing the stick in the next few months. Now, that might create some change. Let's see. But otherwise, the GNU is going to go sideways, and the DA, PA, and others need to stay in there and work from within and not walk out. And Alec, if I can make a final comment, because I can sense we're going to wrap up. For those tribesmen who don't think I should be on here, or why Rob Hersov, I mean, I am happy to stand down. I get no benefit from this whatsoever. Okay, I take a lot of flack from people, friends, or people who used to be friends won't talk to me, A lot of corporate chieftains won't take my call. I don't get invited to golf tournaments anymore. There's, my wife's always nervous I'm going to say something that we will regret forever. There's limited upside and unlimited downside. So if the tribesmen vote, get rid of Rob. We've had enough of him. I'm happy to retire. Okay, I really am.
Rob Hersov, thank you as always for speaking your mind and for giving us the unfiltered, unvarnished truth. Something that we desperately need in South Africa, and something that we at BizNews strive to achieve. As far as voting is concerned, well, just have a look at the number of people who watch the conversations that we have, the updates you give us, and the comments, hundreds and hundreds of comments of support that you get, way out scoring the negativity. My point is that there are still people who are uninformed about your background and what you're here for. And the way I understand it is like Magnus Haystack, who often gets demonized. You're here because you love South Africa. You love the people you've grown up with, the people who are around you. You know that we're the greatest people on earth, and we think so anyway, and that we do have a very bright future if we can just overcome that wonderful saying that Bobby Godsell had of South Africa is, it seems, eternally blessed by its people, but cursed by its governors. And if we allow the governors to continue to curse us, well, we'll get the obvious desserts from that. Rob Hersov is a capitalist activist. I'm Alec Hogg from BizNews.com.